So,
1 second. All right, we are live.
all right. So hello and welcome, and I'm handing over to Jackie.
Hi, everyone. I am Jackie Kerner. I am a board governance facilitator for the Wikimedia Foundation. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we're glad you all are here. We are very fortunate to have those of you here, but also those of you viewing us in the future. So we will have this online for you and available. So I'm going to pivot to Maggie so that she can introduce herself, and then I'll come back for some of the logistics.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and hello, everyone. So I'm going to start off just by very briefly telling you who I am. In my volunteer perspective, I've been a Wikimedian since, I believe, 2007. I edit as user Moonridden Girl. At work, I am the Vice President of Community Resilience and Sustainability, and I'm currently in charge of trust and safety, human rights, community development, the board governance conversations we're having around the elections, and movement strategy. Before I get started, I'd like to visit a couple of things. First, my own friendly space requirements. I can't and I won't discuss specific trust and safety cases. Instead, I can talk about trust and safety protocols and practices and approaches, as well as some of the mistakes we've made, some of the things I'm proud of, and some of the things we're hoping to do. Second, I will not respond to comments or questions that are disrespectful to me, to my colleagues, or to anyone in our communities. I can talk civilly about our work, even if you disagree with me or I disagree with you. I'm not kidding on that, y'all. I am okay with hard conversations. I just really need them to be safe for everyone involved. I can't compromise on that. But in addition to visiting what I'm hoping for from you, I wanted to visit what my commitment is to you. So I'm a very nervous public speaker. People tell me I don't look like it, which makes me very happy, but I am. I will do my best to be brave and honest in this and respectful to all of you as my colleagues, because I consider you my colleagues. We're working together on something that I think is astronomical and great. I will commit that any question that is submitted in this hour or for this hour that I don't have time to respond to, I will respond to in writing on Meta within a week. I will also commit, because Der Hetzer tries to help sure that I always remember to do this, to speak slowly and clearly. I do get excited, I do get nervous, and sometimes I forget and I go too fast. If that happens, please remind me, because I really want to do this right so that you all understand me and that I'm not making this harder on those of you who are being generous by participating with me in the only language in which I can speak. So that's me, and I'm passing it over to Jackie to talk about the process.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Those of you who've just popped in the last few minutes, we appreciate you being here. I'm Jackie Kerner. I'm a board governance facilitator. And just questions that were submitted ahead of time, thank you for those. We appreciate that. We have those on our list. We're going to mix between those of you who are live asking questions and those that were submitted ahead of time. So we'll be monitoring IRC, Telegram, and YouTube. And questions not addressed during this office hour, you'll be happy to know those will receive a written response afterward. And please ping us again if we accidentally miss your question. And I'll go ahead and start with a submitted question to give our live participants a chance to type questions. And there are, oops, I forgot. You may raise your hand for those of you who are in the Zoom room, or you may do the fun little notification in the chat. We'll be looking at both of those. And if you do take the microphone in the Zoom room, I do encourage you to be concise for interest of time. I appreciate that. And let's get to that submitted question. So Maggie, question 1. What's going on with the Trust and Safety Case Review Committee? Will their term be renewed?
Okay, so yes, we've been talking with the Trust and Safety Case Review Committee about their willingness to extend their term a little longer. As many of you will remember, this is a committee that was created to hear appeals to trust and safety cases, and we had somewhat hoped to have the Universal Code of Conduct enforcement pathways completed by the end of this fiscal year, which would mean by the end of June, but that is not where we are at the moment. Because of that, we would like to ask this interim committee to continue their work with us until we know what the permanent process looks like and can put out another call for volunteers.
And a second part of that question, do you have any statistics about their outcomes right now?
Statistics, no. We do put out, I think it's a quarterly report on Meta. Sorry, but if the quarterly report hasn't gone out recently, I'll find out when the next one is, and we'll put the links to that in the office hours notes. Oh, thank you, Derhexer. He put it in the chat on Zoom, so we can make sure that everybody gets a chance to see that.
Well, thanks for that participation. That's so helpful. Now let's go ahead and go on. There were quite a few questions about grants and the strategy process. So let's move to one of those questions to mix those in. So Kim posted there would be $2,000 grants for the strategy process. On what conditions will OGC members be eligible for such a grant?
Okay. I don't know. We are working on this. We have money to distribute for grants by the end of the year. I'm not sure what the process is, but I do know that Kim and Carol undoubtedly do know, as they are very heavily working on movement strategy. So that's another thing I will have to put into links in Meta to make sure that you have access. Oh, Kim is here. I forgot, Kim, you were here. That's my nervousness. Do you have an answer to that, Kim?
The only problem is I just landed literally because domestic stuff. So what's the question? Sorry.
What wonderful timing. They were asking about how to request grants for the remainder of the fiscal year for related to movement strategy.
Yes, just wait a few days. We are just putting all the last details together, but expect an announcement from us. Expect a simple form. Expect a simple process and a quick process too. So just wait a few days more. We are still connecting all the dots.
Great, let's pause here and see if we have any submitted questions or anyone who wants to raise their hand in the chat to ask one live in the Zoom room. Okay, I don't see any, so we'll move forward with the submitted questions. So we'll actually jump to one about the Universal Code of Conduct. So that's something that's very, very exciting and on a lot of everyone's mind right now. So do you think that cross-community ratification of the UCOC will be important for getting communities to accept it?
Let's see. Well, I know there's a lot of interest in a cross-communities ratification process. I'm not sure what that would look like. We have to think very carefully about how we do it in a way that is respectful to all participants in different regions. We have to think about how we do it in a way that makes everybody feel like it is something that is in their best interest, that meets their best needs, and that we're all pulling together on it. So do I think that it is important? I think it's important that we all come together on a process that works. I'm not sure what that process is going to be. So yes, but I don't have information on what that would look like.
And the second part of the question, are there plans to have a discussion about what that ratification would look like?
Ha.
So you somewhat answered that.
Yeah, we have to have that discussion because I don't have that answer.
So great minds think alike. Let's just say that. All right, so let's jump back to something reflecting UCOC and grants. So now we're combining some topics. So presently, affiliate grant agreements require groups to have a safety policy for events. Will the UCOC create more requirements and responsibilities for affiliates when running events?
Well, I'd have to, honestly, in order for me to answer this question, I'd have to look at the friendly space policy and the UCOC and say, is there anything missing? I've always considered that our friendly space policies are fairly robust, but I say that as a person who has never facilitated an event, which means I do not know them like the back of my hand. So there's a possibility but I don't think that we're anywhere near there yet. I think that the important thing that we'll all need to keep in mind is the intention of these policies is to make sure that participants are safe everywhere in our movement, and where we see gaps to address that.
Great. And just going to speak to those just joining, you may raise your hand in the chat or the raise hand feature if you're here in the Zoom room to take the mic. And we encourage you to do so. Just please be concise when you do.
And let me just also add really quickly, Jackie, if you're in IRC or YouTube, you can also type your questions in the stream. We have people watching those channels. So live questions are welcome, even though I've been told we have quite a few already in queue. So we got a lot.
There's a lot of fun stuff going on, lots of good things going on. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next question. It focuses on movement charter. So I'm interested to be on the movement charter drafting team. Where should I express that?
Kim, are you able to speak to that since you're facilitating all that work?
Yes, I wish I had another different answer that is not just wait a couple of days. But briefly, what we know until now is that there's been two proposals, different proposals coming from different areas of the movement. There's also been some conversation on Meta about this. We have also done our homework inside the foundation just to be ready to facilitate the next steps. So I actually, there's movement going on these days. So next week, probably next week, I would say, let me say this. I'm convinced that by next Saturday, so during the next week, we are going to all know what are the next steps for a question like this. And by that I mean is that it's not that we, the foundation, have the answer and we will announce it, is that we need to just agree on the very first steps for that. But in any case, yes, it needs to move fast. What we want is that that group is formed by the end of June, if possible.
And here's a follow-up part to the question, which you may or may not know as well. Who will recruit and select members?
Both proposals presented have ideas about that, but they are different. So if I would have now an answer, I would be already doing something wrong. So we need to discuss these very first steps in order to just bootstrap this movement charter process.
All right, I'll pause again briefly and see if there are any questions that were submitted live. And again, we encourage you to do so wherever you are watching us. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. Wikimedia Deutschland posted a letter on Meta about compensating volunteers from emerging and marginalized communities so they can take part in these important councils and drafting processes. What are the intentions around that?
Boy, are you all going to get tired of hearing me say that I don't know. I read the letter with great interest. As many of you know, I really came into movement strategy quite recently, so I'm still getting up to speed on a lot of the conversations that have been had. And people are helping me understand some of the challenges that participants in some of our communities are having in terms of taking part in these important conversations because of their inability to do so without some form of compensation. There are big questions around how we do this, and I'm still working to understand what some of those questions are and where some of the answers are. For instance, I know that the call is to do it with our emerging communities and underrepresented communities, but we have challenges with payment processing in some of those very same communities. Does that mean that we might offer a stipend to somebody in an emerging region, but not somebody else in an emerging region because we can't get money to them? So I need to understand what research has been done and what is possible. But to me, it seems clear that figuring this question out is a top priority because we can't really constitute a charter writing committee until we understand what we are able to do to facilitate participation. There's a request in the Zoom chat for the link to the letter on Meta. If somebody could help with that, I'd be grateful.
All right, now we'll go back to a UCOC question, if we can pivot to that. So some harassment is organized off Wiki by organized groups and forums. How can the system to review situations that might span hundreds of interactions or involve many users?
Can you repeat the first part of that question? It was a little complex.
Yeah, so some harassment, organized harassment in various places. How can this system to review these situations encompass all of the instances, whether hundreds, and involve many users? So I think it's, so I think it's asking for, what can we do about these situations that aren't just, one off or one large situation, but many little situations that accumulate and in areas, different areas.
I think that's a really good question, and one that we have to solve collectively. The way I see it, this is organized off-wiki challenges are some of the biggest we face, whether it is from people who are trying to subvert the neutrality of our content, or people who are trying to attack others who they feel like don't represent their best interests. We've seen issues around this in the Wikipedia universe with some hot topics around the elections, around, I hate to even mention the term because it's polarizing, Gamergate. And we really do need better systems of review. How can we do it? Well, in Maggie's imaginary world, we have a brilliant, wise council of people who are able to look at evidence that is submitted and collated. Who collates it? I don't know. Maybe trust and safety has a role in that. Maybe not. Maybe it's volunteer driven. And we are able to look at it in context globally and make very wise decisions that will solve all the problems of the world.
All right, so first, for a second, I'm going to put my educator hat on and call out YouTube. YouTube, do you want to submit any questions? We know there are people out there watching on YouTube. So do you have any questions to submit? Aha, we have some. So 2 questions. Is there an interim ED or CEO?
That is, well, first, I know the answer, but second, that is not actually part of my job, but I do know the answer. So I will say we have a transition team that is working with the board of trustees while the CEO/ED search is going on. And that team includes Amanda Keaton, who's in this hangout with us, our general counsel, Jaime Villagomez, our chief financial officer, and I suddenly don't remember Robin's last name, which is very embarrassing. Thank you, Robin Arville, who is our chief of HR, what we call talent and culture at the foundation, and some other people do too, but I know that's not universally understood.
And then another question that was submitted via YouTube, thank you for that. When are Board of Trustees elections expected?
The answer to that is I'm not sure, but I know there's going to be a communication about it, I believe this week. They had conversations around it this past week, and all of the board governance conversations have been rolled up to them to review. So I think we will all know the answer to that in very short order. You're muted, Jackie.
Yeah. I'll give another pause to see if we have any friends who are watching us live that want to submit questions. And otherwise, I will go to another submitted question beforehand. All right, I don't see any just yet, so we're going to move on to the next submitted question. So this one has to deal with movement strategy in the charter and IGC. So I'm going to break it down a little bit into chunks. So in the strategy recommendations, it was envisioned as an interim global council that would be tasked with drafting the movement charter. Is that still the intention?
So my understanding is that some of the thinking around that is evolving, and that there are some people have proposed that we move straight into the movement charter drafting committee rather than going through the process of figuring out what an interim global council would look like. I will tell you all honestly, to me, that makes sense. I think it makes sense to have people who are expert in policy and focused on policy come in and define what the charter would be for the Global Council, and then to look for people who match the needs and the evolution of that document to begin doing that work.
All right, great. We have another question submitted from YouTube. So give me just a moment just to read it so I can parse it. Okay. Okay, so what can the WMF and Trust and Safety do with what we need? Let's see. I'm sorry, Mehrdad, could you help me clarify that, please? I'm not quite understanding the intention.
While Mehrdad does, let's go to the next question in that you already had submitted.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mehrdad. Thank you for clarifying that. So let's go back to another movement strategy one. So while we're on a roll. So this is, they also asked for a commitment for grants for strategic initiatives through the community resources team in your annual plan. What are the plans for that? And there again, that seems like this is a theme coming here. That lots of interest around this.
Yes. So we are in annual planning right now. For those of you who don't know, it is one of the busiest seasons at the foundation. So there's a lot of work and discussions going on. My intention is to request generous grant set aside, and don't ask me what generous means because I don't have that answer in my head. But my intention is to submit a request for the grants. Whether and how community resources is going to be involved in that is still being determined. I believe community resources is involved whenever grants are given out, but whether they're the ones who decide how, I think there's still a lot of questions to be answered around that in the next few weeks.
All right, now we have clarification on that question from YouTube. So I think it's, what can the WMF do with real world situations, working with legal, PR, tech admins, editors, in order to get disruptive individuals and long-term abusers off the site when on-wiki sanctions don't succeed?
So what can the WMF and TNS do? All right, so this is a question asked from the perspective of how staff can support. And I'm going to be a bit vague about some of this because the people who watch this video, some of them may be long-term abusers who are trying to stay on the site. And because of that, I don't want to tell them everything we have in our toolkit. But I will say that working with our legal team, we do have opportunities to work with ISPs on occasion when we have long-term persistent abusers, for them to help see if there's anything they can do to support us. I will say that there are some occasions when we have worked with law enforcement when there are long-term abusers. Obviously, it depends on the nature of the long-term abuse. I don't believe that we have explored PR approaches, and I think we'd have to think very carefully about that, because sometimes you can encourage bad behavior just by letting people know that bad behavior actually gets attention. I remember years ago when I started at the foundation, we had recently done some work with Gavin de Becker, who wrote The Gift of Fear, which talks about what to do with stalkers and harassers. And one of the things that they recommend is that you don't give them oxygen at all, because when you do, it encourages more of them to flourish. So I think we'd have to think very carefully about the balance between using PR to stop long-term abuse versus not using PR to encourage long-term abuse.
All right, thanks for that. Now we have a question. Would you like to ask this question live? Can I ask, Barkeep? Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and ask it for you. So, acknowledging this isn't strictly under this umbrella of Maggie, I'm going to ask anyway. It seems that a number of us feel the community tech team has rather limited resources. How, as volunteers, could we advocate for that team getting more resources?
That's a good question. Well, I feel like in some ways you just did, but I would say by participating in the community tech processes to help them understand what the priorities are, by giving your comment on the annual plan proposals as they start coming out, making sure that we recognize gaps in tech more globally and make sure that we prioritize the work that is needed most. I hope that's helpful.
All right, well, thank you for that question. And again, please, anyone, wherever you're watching, feel free to submit questions and we will try to get you an answer. Or otherwise, if you feel more comfortable, please reach out in another method and we can answer you in writing. So thank you for being present today, for those of you who are able to be present. So let's go ahead and go on to the next question. I'm actually going to go into my umbrella of places now. Do you have any plans to increase the awareness about the board's work across the communities?
Well, me personally, we have a communications department, and the communications department, as I understand it, is submitting a request to focus programmatically this coming year on increasing understanding of what the movement is doing, which will certainly increase understanding of the board's role. I know that the board, many of you are probably aware, has recently created a community affairs committee. They're very interested in how the community can learn more about their work, the work of the board generally, not just the committee. So I would say there are plans. It's probably not my major focus in community resilience and sustainability, but I'm certainly very interested in them and involved in them in my role for community development and board governance.
Now, here's a really good question that was submitted. What's left for me to do if I want to get involved with movement strategy?
One of the things that really interests me about movement strategy, I was kind of involved in it at the very beginning, but then my work veered in a different direction for a few years in the middle, and now I'm coming back. So one of the things that interests me about movement strategy is the way that I think about it is movement strategy is everything. It is the water we swim in. It is the air we breathe. Everything we all do all the time should be working towards the movement strategy. If this really is our strategy, then this is our focus. Now, I realize there are some keep the lights on work that people do, and not every volunteer is super interested in working on movement strategy, but when you fill content gaps, you're working on movement strategy. When you bring in new editors, you're working on movement strategy. When you curate content, when you enforce standards of behavior, it's all movement strategy related. So what I want to say with all this, getting back to the question of how you can get involved, there are big conversations that we are having around, especially how we organize ourselves to do our work. So like what the movement charter is, what the global council is, what these hubs will be. These are all big, important internal structural questions that we need to grapple with in the coming year around movement strategy. There are also big externally facing components we have to deal with. How do we make sure that knowledge is complete in regions of the world where it's currently underrepresented? So you can get involved in movement strategy by joining these big conversations or by doing the work. One of the hopes that I have is that by the end of next year, we're going to have ways for people to plug in to movement strategy that is from the highest level to the lowest. And I will share with you that when I started as a Wikipedian, I focused on a list of missing articles. I didn't know how to contribute, but I really wanted to. And I found a list of music articles that were considered important because they were in other encyclopedias or what have you. And I just started writing articles, and I wrote hundreds of them. This was movement strategy work, even though I didn't know it. And I would like to make it very easy for people to do important movement work at every level. And Kim puts in note, when I say next year, I mean next fiscal year. Yes, I do. When I had a child, when I was a child, I thought of the year as the school year. Now I think of the year as the fiscal year. It's very confusing. We should all just use calendar years, but even then, the calendar year starts and ends at different dates around the world. So I guess there's no hope for us.
Well, thank you for that answer. And thanks for everyone who's gotten involved with movement strategy. It's really a great seeing everyone come together. And I do appreciate, I also want to speak this truth that it's difficult for everyone to be involved with everything. So thank you for those of you who are able to be involved. And we appreciate you folks who are unable to be involved as well. Let's go ahead and go on to a question that's somewhat related about regional representation. Let's see, I've lost in here. I've gotten lost in my notes. Give me just a moment to find that question again. Oh, so with regards to regional representation, we have been hearing that regional representation, eventually with hubs, might take place. I've also been following discussions with the grant strategy relaunch, in which there is a discussion on regional representation. I think it's a theme. Are you and the grants team agreeing on what these regions are? And are these two processes in which the idea of regions is being conceived independent of each other?
Okay.
So I guess, is everyone connecting about regional discussions and regional representation through the processes?
Well, all right, everyone connecting, probably not, but I think that that we are working to pull together these concepts. I mean, I've heard mixed responses to the idea of regions. I hear some people have a concern that regional clustering may not make the most sense, whereas other people say that regional support is the best way to make things happen. And I think both of these things are true, depending on where you stand. So I remember early in the discussion when we were talking about a regional system, because I was plugged into the movement strategy then, we thought a lot about how people in regions could mobilize to get, for example, financial support from grant-making organizations in their environments. In this case, regions make a lot of sense. Regions don't make sense to the extent to which they limit people participating in areas of interest. I think it would be a mistake for us to create silos because we're trying to increase regional support. That to me would be a misstep. In terms of grant making and other people and whether regions means the same thing to everybody, I think probably not yet. I think we have looked a lot at regions in terms of who is currently participating in the movement, who's not here yet, where growth in the internet is happening in the world, and where we could be engaging people in a more sustained way. But I think that these are conversations that are probably going to be continuing and then coalescing in this coming fiscal year, which begins in July.
All right, we're going to move to something related as far as different regions and appreciating the different regions. Will the Universal Code of Conduct be forced on communities that oppose and don't sign it?
I will say that this is the kind of language that I set forth at the beginning that I'm not interested in engaging with. If you say forced on an individual, I will say, yes, people can say, I don't want to adhere to a code. And I would say yes, but when you say forced on communities who don't want to sign it, then you're putting us in an adversarial position. And I would say, if a community has a problem, I've said this repeatedly through the whole process, if a community has a problem, not an individual, but a community with a code of conduct, then the question is not, do we force it on them? The question is, how do we evaluate the code of conduct to see what the problem is? How do we find out whether the problem is valid, whether it is an issue of impact to a community, or whether a community is looking towards being exclusive, not allowing outsiders to join, not interested in working well with the rest of us. It is important that we all come together as a movement around behaviors in a way that makes sense. We have a really hard job. We are trying to pull together knowledge for the whole world to engage in. And we can't do that if we are so caught up in internal fights and hostility that we are not able to get this work done. So I think that we are at a point, especially as we are going more global and we are seeing more permeation between projects, that we have to agree on how we treat each other. But please try to, like I said, I'll talk about anything. I swear I will talk about anything, but let's try to come at it from a problem-solving language.
All right, well, speaking of problem-solving language, we have a question submitted asking, have there been talks to improve the OTRS system and make it more efficient?
So the OTRS system isn't part of my wheelhouse, but I do know a bit about it because as an OTRS agent myself, I care a lot about it. And in fact, years ago, I was the foundation's liaison for working with the OTRS administrators. Some of you may be aware that the reason why we call it OTRS is because OTRS is the software we use. And that has been both good and bad. No software is perfect. This particular software we've had challenges with because we are, as I was told some years ago when we upgraded the software, the world's largest instance of OTRS, which means even the programmers for OTRS don't always know how to support us. This year, the OTRS software system announced that it was discontinuing its community version, which means that, as I understand it, we have to stop using OTRS because it will become a security issue overnight. So, as I understand it, although my team is not leading this work, we have to transition out of OTRS at some point. Right now, I believe the intention may be to make sure that we attend to the security matters until we can and do. The other things, I see a lot of room for OTRS improvement, but it's outside of my remit to get involved in it. I think one of the issues that we face with OTRS is that the movement writ large doesn't really know how to work with this. And the volunteer response team has one of the most critical volunteer roles we have, which is being the interface with the world. And a lot of people don't know how to use talk pages and never will, but they have to have someone they can reach out to when there are problems. And I wish that we could create better systems of working together with the volunteer response team members who have a really difficult job of trying to remain neutral in the projects. Some communities do very well with this, but I know from the time when I was the liaison that some language Wikipedias are not integrated into the system and don't know how to respond when volunteers from that system engage them. Sorry, I could talk about this one all day because I do care so much about that work.
Well, thank you for that answer. Now, here's something that's a bit near and dear to my heart and my curiosity as a researcher and my other hat. Some conduct problems are the result of stress and mental health challenges. What would the foundation consider providing mental health support for services for volunteers? And I'll add on to that resources, but that's something that I talked about a lot during the work with the working group for community health.
Mm-hmm. Would it consider offering resources? Well, I would say that we already do. Do we offer enough resources? No. And in fact, this is something that we've been actively talking and thinking about. So it's a really big question, right? There are so many big questions around the well-being of our community that we have to engage in. As many of you know, we just hired our human rights lead to work on helping people around the world who become targeted by organized oppression, whether that's governmental or terrorist. So there's a mental health, certainly a mental health aspect in that and ensuring the basics of safety. We have a policy person in trust and safety whose job it is to provide victim support. And I use the word victim there very specifically as a term of art in people who are in the immediate aftermath of having been harassed or otherwise abused. It does not mean that people who are harassed and abused are stuck with a victim's identity. It is just referring to a specific window of time. We're talking with some groups like the LGBT plus group about peer support, something that we're really interested in exploring as part of a universal code of conduct next phases. Someone comments in the Zoom chat, which I can see, about the fact that mental health should be addressed by professional psychologists and social workers. And this is something that I do know is a concern. My teams have been involved since I started at the foundation in what we call our emergency response network. So when there are threats of suicide or violence on our sites, we work with communities to make sure these are presented to professionals. Early on in my work in that area, I attempted myself, based on some experiences I had had with manning a suicide hotline, to talk to a volunteer who was expressing suicidal ideas. And our then chief of talent and culture had a background in psychology and very gently helped me to understand that that was overreach on my part, because I am not a trained professional capable of understanding what would trigger a person like that. That is a lesson that I took to heart. It is important to us that we make sure that people who are in distress work with professionals. So Trust and Safety has a page trying to help people find professional resources. And even as we move more into peer support, I think it is absolutely critical that we not fool ourselves into thinking that we are qualified to replace professional service. So sorry for that very dark topic. And if I didn't answer the question fully, because I think I got off on my own little subtrack, let me know.
All right, now we have a question submitted from IRC, so thank you for that. What do you feel are the areas where Trust and Safety has the most room for improvement?
Well, first of all, Trust and Safety, a lot of people don't realize that Trust and Safety is actually 2 divisions, 3 soon. So we have Trust and Safety Operations, who are the people who address issues that occur on our sites. They work very closely with our legal team. Well, we're in the legal team now. They work very closely with the lawyers on our legal team to make sure that we are maintaining the essential conditions to keep Wikimedia going. Then we have Trust and Safety Policy, which is led by Patrick, who is here. I have not asked Patrick to speak to the Universal Code of Conduct. And Patrick, if you would like to, interrupt me. But his group is working towards policy evolution to ensure that we do have good, clear policies and that everyone has equal and equitable access to systems of empowerment and justice. And then we are building out a new disinformation wing, whose job it will be to work with communities to help them from targeted disinformation campaigns. So I suspect the question is referring to operations, because I think that is what people think about first when they think Trust and Safety. And I want to start also by saying my Trust and Safety people rock. I know them. I know the hard job they have. I know the stress that it puts them under. I have been with them through the threats they've received from people, some of whom are very bad people, and nothing I say is meant to be in any way critical of them as people, and only to own my own areas of improvement. Communication. It is difficult for us to communicate properly with people in all circumstances, quickly and efficiently and compassionately. There's a lot of work. They always have a full table of work to do. And when people are in distress, either because they feel they've been harassed or because they have just learned that someone else thinks they've been harassing them, they need a lot of time and emotional support and care, sometimes more than we have the time or the training to offer. So we are working with the Trust and Safety Operations team to continue to improve this capacity, to bring them the support they need to have these delicate communications, while also being able to focus on processing the constant workflows. The other area where I see that we really need to improve is, I think one of the biggest threats we face around the Universal Code of Conduct and Trust and Safety in our movement is people not necessarily feeling like it is fair. I think probably everybody listening to me will agree that there is no perfect system of justice in this world. It is something that we constantly strive to achieve. It is important to me that our trust and safety staff be given every opportunity to be fair and to be seen as fair, which means that I would like to create a better world where the people who are accused of misbehavior trust that that accusation is being handled fairly, with compassion and with understanding for the stress of taking part in this movement. I don't want anybody to be afraid that some arbitrary hand of law is going to smash down and knock them away from doing work that is important to us. I myself believe that all of us have room to improve in how we treat each other, and that everyone should be given every opportunity to engage usefully and collegially in this environment. And that means not necessarily being penalized for a first instance. On the other hand, I also want everybody in our movement who has been abused by someone else, and I could tell you some horror stories, to know that they will have the support and care they need to be safe here. So those are the challenges.
Well, thank you for that answer. I'm going to say, let's change topics just a little bit, because we've had a few heavy questions in a row. So let's pivot a little bit. And thank you to those of you who have just joined. If you are wherever you are, whether you're in Zoom, IRC, YouTube, ask your questions, please. And if you're here in the Zoom room with us, feel free to raise your hand with the chat feature or the fun little notation, and we will have you ask your question live if you wish to do so, or you may type it. And as always, you may submit your questions and we will respond to them afterward if that is more comfortable to you, or if something comes up in your mind afterward. So our next question, to take it on a bit of a lighter note: how can Wikimedia affiliates engage in implementing the movement strategy? So that might be different from the individuals, but how can affiliates get connected with this?
Okay, well, it does tie back to what I said about plugging in at every level. And when I think about affiliates and their unique and special role in the movement, it is in their ability to mobilize people in their areas to do important work. So I hope that affiliates will stay closely plugged in conversations to make sure that the unique conditions of contributing to the movement are understood in their areas. I hope that affiliates will also come thinking about the needs of users that don't yet exist. So what accommodations do we need to bring in more people that is also still maintaining a useful, productive environment for their own? And there's going to be a lot of conversations and a lot of activity over the next few months, especially as we get the movement charter worked out. So I hope that the affiliates will stay very closely plugged in.
All right, great. I'll put a pause for another moment to see if we have any more questions come forward. All right, Noseback Bear, give me just a moment. I'm going to start us on another question. If you feel like you want to answer this post, that's absolutely fine, or we can try and answer it now. So I'm going to go ahead and move to another question, and then I will read your question to see what we can do. So I have a question here on the list. How can volunteers help with the upcoming board election, and how can affiliates get involved with the upcoming election and sharing that information, supporting this, being a community?
So, okay. So as I said earlier, there's going to be information about the election very soon. But I also have passion around this because some of you who know I'm in the United States, some of you aren't, some of you are. It's been a turbulent few years for my country. And I think I'd like for us all to take this election very seriously and think about who we are asking to take important leadership roles in our movement, and think about how we want to have representation in these roles. And that goes for the Global Council and for anybody else that we are putting into power. Let's be very careful and thoughtful about who we engage with. Let's make sure that that we are reaching out to people we see that could actually have the qualities for this, and getting them into the visible eye so that people know, people see them, people can help amplify them, and people can put them in the position of being able to lead this work. Let's stay engaged with the process and make sure, yeah, okay, somebody asked inside, I live in the United States. I'm I shouldn't say most. I assume most people recognize my accent as very Southern United States, and the United States we've had a rough couple of years. Yes. So anyway, stay engaged, take it seriously, be part of it, help us find the right people to lead us into the future.
All right, so we're going to go back to a question that was asked in the Zoom room. So there's been, okay, so Nosebag Bear, please take the mic.
Okay, hi Maggie. So multiple contractors and editors who do a lot in the sort of the formal strategy discussions, sort of the broader area, have been saying that we'd be getting overwhelmed, sort of not able to participate actively in all of the ongoing major discussions. The average amount of feedback has been dropping over time. I think that's because for over a year now, we've had sort of multiple top tier topics, not just important, but critical. And that looks likely to continue for the foreseeable future. We can always stop, but that sort of reduces rendering our voices on these topics. Do you have any thoughts on how to reduce this issue of sort of falling feedback over time just from sheer overload of such critical discussions?
That's a really good question. And do I have thoughts on it? Well, I resonate. I will say that in my years at the foundation, it's one big important topic after another. And I know it's exhausting because there are days when things show up in my inbox and I just find myself thinking, where am I going to find the energy to deal with this? And I always try to keep conscious of the fact with volunteers that this is their spare time that people are giving us. This is in addition to everything else, which means the burden on them is even higher, and the responsibility is on us to make sure that it's not overwhelming. How to do that without overwhelming people when we do in fact have so many critical things going on is a really good question. The one thing that I will say the foundation has been trying to do over the past year, our communications department has been trying to do a rallying job of pulling together all of the foundation's outwardly facing work. So not about like, is our pay software the right pay software, but the stuff that actually does involve community input is trying to make sure that it is spaced so that it's not overwhelming. But I will acknowledge that there is a polarity. That's one of our bingo words, a polarity around making sure that we bring people in early and often, and yet not bring them in too much and give them the space to engage thoughtfully. So we've been trying to stage it. I think we can still get better at staging it. And I think it's probably important for us to build in opportunities to pause. For example, the Universal Code of Conduct, it had been our original goal to wrap up both phases in one fiscal year. And we put in a pause on phase one when it was apparent that it was overwhelming people. And now we put in a pause on phase two for the same reason, to build in more space. Pause is a wrong word because we didn't stop. We just built in more flexibility for the deadline. So we are trying to get better about both making sure things get done, but making sure that we don't lose sight of the weight that comes on people as we push to get it done on time, and making sure that we recognize the priorities and that we focus on getting the things that must be done first. So hopefully that's helpful. I wish I had a better answer.
Now we're going to take it to something somewhat related. So thank you for this question from YouTube. So that we all know that we're doing the best we can, but looking back at things can provide some great opportunity for reflection. So how would the Wikimedia Foundation reach out to communities that had not been engaged in any of the movement-wide activities due to time zone, no affiliate, language barriers?
This is an area where I've been at the foundation for 10 years. So I would say this is an area where I've seen tremendous improvement over the last few years. And I'm pretty proud of that. When I first started at the foundation, we didn't have a liaisons program. I was actually the first pilot liaison hired. And we didn't have a ton of outreach into the parts of the world that didn't just show up. So over the last couple of years, we have been more and more intentionally inclusive, bringing in people to take conversations around the world to people in their own language. Now, once again, I'm going to use the bingo word of polarity. This has caused a little bit of tension, particularly with questions around like the Universal Code of Conduct. How do you make sure that you get representative feedback? How do you balance that against the question of numbers? How do we make sure that we are reaching out to people from around the world and getting them in the conversations in a movement that has systems mostly set up in English, mostly, or larger affiliates who have heavy staffing? So more and more, we are trying to take it out to people. And I know, because I have secret insight into the annual planning. Please don't tell anybody I told you all this. I know that the communications department is really thinking about how to build up better regional outreach to make sure that people in those areas know who to talk to and where to get the help they need. So this is a major focus. We've come a long way in the last few years, and we still have work to do.
All right, we only have a few more minutes here, so now is the time if you wish to ask your question live.
I'm about to survive another office hour.
And I'll hand you another question, and let's end this on a good positive note for the rest of our day today. How will the UCOC help encourage active modeling of good behavior?
Well, okay, all right. Let me give you an example. When I first came into this meeting, before it even started, Cornelius was here, and Cornelius said, "Maggie, change your pronoun." And I didn't understand a few years ago why this mattered to some people. I didn't understand the way that my following this best practice would make it feel safer for people who live in a world that challenges the pronouns they use. The code of conduct, by helping us understand the behaviors that make other people feel safe, will allow us to intentionally take up those safe behaviors. Another example, I've already mentioned Der Hexer. Sorry if I'm embarrassing you, but I really do appreciate that you remind me to talk slowly. I get excited, I forget, I talk too fast, but because you remind me, it matters to people that you do this. I try to do it. So with the Universal Code of Conduct, I really hope that what it will help us realize is what matters to other people to feel safe, and to intentionally choose to behave in ways that increase that.
All right, for the final question of the hour, I'm going to say, Maggie, what is a question that you have been thinking about within all these things happening that's really encouraging you right now? So what is something in all of this that's really encouraging you in the forward, since you have been around for so long and seeing all this happening? So what's something that's really exciting you right now for the final point of the hour, since we have 1 minute?
Okay, so since we only have 1 minute, I'm going to try to keep it very high level. I am very excited by the amount of passion and the amount of care that people have for the work we do. So the fact that people are coming together to have these hard conversations excites me, because it would be easy to pick up a hobby that doesn't involve this. And yet I think the Wikimedia movement is one of the most important and powerful things in the world. And I know there are some people who think I'm overselling that, but I swear, when I was a little girl, all I wanted was to know everything. I haunted my library, interlibrary loan, and now there's the internet, and the Wikimedia movement is creating knowledge banks for kids like I was, and I can't think of anything better than that. So I am so grateful that there are so many people who care about this. Also, just for clarity, Der Hexer is reminding me for the benefit of other people, he is actually probably better at my language than I am in my own. And certainly I've heard him speak several other languages that I wish I could speak. So anyway, thank you all for coming. I am so relieved that I've survived another hour. I appreciate you engaging with hard questions, and I appreciate you doing it in a way that makes me feel safe to participate, because I care about my own sense of safety too. So we will follow up if there are questions not answered, and I'm sure there are. Annual planning is very, very busy week, but by the end of the week, we will have answers up. Thank you. Deep breaths. Are we still live?